Hello everyone, Ken here. Welcome to my 2015 Game of the Year Awards. I've put together a collection of award categories ranging from the standard to the silly, and I'm going to make a completely unnecessary attempt to rank all my favourites in each from the past 12 months. Now it was tough going, but I've cut every category down to 4 nominees and a winner. As always, bear in mind that these are all my own personal opinions, so if you've got something you'd like to talk about, then feel free to do so in the comments below. So, without further ado, let's get started. Best Style. Bloodborne. From its flowing trench coats and impeccable scarves to its gothic streets slick with the blood of the hunt, every part of Bloodborne just feels so carefully crafted to fit into its world. While the result is a tighter focused aesthetic than its Souls predecessors, From Software absolutely justify that trade-off with just how damn stylish the whole thing is. The trick weapons are what really make it, however. Their designs and transformation animations are so satisfying that you can lose complete track of time just snapping them back and forth. Crypt of the Necrodancer. Necrodancer's cutesy pixel looks and bouncing animation are a joy to behold. The moment you step into a level and the beat begins to kick in, you can already feel something special. The unique enemy animations perfectly blend practicality, rhythm and style. The skeletons dance in a way that feels appropriate, but also clearly conveys their attack patterns. Then you start to build your combo up as the music intensifies, the floor lights kick in and the shopkeeper's song rings out. It's a delightful dance-off of destruction. Invisible Ink. If I considered the phrase cyberpunk spy heist, I'm pretty sure my brain would immediately conjure up something along the lines of Invisible Ink. That slight angularity to all the designs, the sharp outfits and crisp shading, the exaggerated way your agents press up against doors and peer around corners. It's so stylish and it just looks right. It's not all about looks though, the music brings an exciting tension to matters and popping in and out of the incognito interface shifts the sound and visuals perfectly in a way that makes you feel like the ultimate future hacker. Splatoon. Splatoon draws influence from 90s cartoons, urban, punk, cyberpunk and much more to craft a bright, fresh world with its own distinct style. A world just begging to be lavishly smothered in neon ink. The Inklings themselves are rad, and the vast multitude of ways to dress them up allows every player to find their own personal aesthetic. If a piece of gear takes your fancy, you can even put in a special order with the back early Street Urchin. Street Urchin! Let's not even get into how top-notch Splatoon's aquatic pun game is, or we'll be here all day. There's gallons of style on offer here, but none layered so thick as that of Bloodborne. There's a real freedom to crafting your look, from the surprisingly deep character creation toolset through to the way that nuanced differences in clothing stats allows you to fashion-born your way through all but the toughest encounters. The world you explore feels expertly put together with a real density to the environmental set dressing that helps to set the scene without ever feeling unnecessarily cluttered. The way that the world and the enemies you encounter in it slowly shift from the human end of things through to the more beastly offerings is impressive, but then From Software carefully weaves in their increasingly less subtle Lovecraftian undertones alongside it. They never go full tentacle, however. There's always a distinct place for both sides of Bloodborne's horror spectrum, and that's important. There's no doubt that the real star of the show are the trick weapons, however. The way the Blades of Mercy pull apart and swing back together is one of the most satisfying core actions I've ever experienced. It's a joy that spreads across everything you can wield, from the crackling of a bolt-papered whip to the antediluvian nightmare of the Augur of Ebrietas. It's those little touches that make the difference, and Bloodborne is packed with them. Game of the Year 2015. Well, after 5 days of awards, we've made it to the big one. It's time to talk about my Game of the Year for 2015. As with everything so far, this is all about my personal favourites. I'm going for a top 10, but in reality I probably could have happily put at least 20 games on this list, and had plenty to say about each of them. What a fantastic year it's been. So, let's start at the bottom and work our way up as I finally unveil my top 10 games of the year for 2015. Number 10, Mortal Kombat X. I'd played previous games in the series, but Mortal Kombat 9 was the game that finally sold me on MK as a game I actually wanted to invest time into. However, Mortal Kombat X took that base and stepped it up a notch to create a game I actually became fully invested in. Without the nostalgia of the original games, 9's storyline was still fun but felt fairly simplistic. As a result, X's plot ended up being far more compelling to me, with the new characters feeling far more hit than miss. Another big factor was the integration of multiple fighting styles for each character. I love this approach because it allowed each fighter to have a distinct core style, but also be adaptable to your own personal preferences or the matchup you were dealing with. The combat system struck a lovely balance of pick up and play accessibility and higher level depth. NetherRealm also packed in a bunch of nice little touches, such as the brutalities, something which doesn't directly affect gameplay but affords a visceral reward for attaining a specific set of victory conditions. Having pulled me in, however, what's really kept me there was the addition of the faction system, with its levelling, unique kill moves, tournaments, wars and so on. Even something as small as daily challenges offered me that little incentive to come back every single day for several months running, which meant I invested the consistent time to become more competent with the systems, and thus enjoy the whole game a bit more. Overall, Mortal Kombat X took the incredible base that Series Reboot 9 had crafted and built an even better game around it, so much so in fact that I just had to squeeze it in here. Number 9. Contradiction spots the liar. For me, there are two key components that made me fall so deeply in love with Contradiction's quirky detective tale. Specifically, its quirkiness and its detective work. The whole thing is wonderfully silly, yet never in an overblown manner. My initial impression was that things were being played seriously, and it just happened to come across as a little goofy. But it does become apparent quite quickly that the people involved are aware the whole thing is a bit over the top. It's notable that they're never explicit with that self-awareness, however. There aren't any winks to camera or sly jokes outside of the fiction. To do so might undermine the game's charm, and the restraint they show helps keep Contradiction's cast of eccentric characters just believable enough to make the whole thing work. The other core components to the game's success is just how satisfying that central contradiction mechanic ended up being to me. Successfully pulling off a game about detective work is challenging, because there's a fine line to balance between laying out the obvious evidence in front of the player and forcing them into having to make wild leaps of logic. The beauty here is that the concept is very simple. You're always hunting for inconsistencies in a single character's responses, so you know where you should be looking rather than having to scour the environment for some hidden key clue to break the case open. Some lies will stand out the moment you hear them, while others may take long contemplation to put together, yet when you spot them they never feel unfair. Contradiction is a wonderful rollercoaster ride of aha moments, made all the better by the fresh set of ridiculous dialogue you're rewarded with upon uncovering each new step of the investigation. Number 8. Invisible Ink. I'm a big fan of turn-based grid strategy games, so Invisible Ink was always on my radar. What really made the game stand out to me in particular, however, was the way it handled random factors. Oftentimes, games such as this weighed dice rolls into most of their combat mechanics. However, aside from one or two small exceptions, Invisible Ink has no real variance involved with a minute-to-minute gameplay. When you attack a guard, you take them down, and they stay there for a set number of turns. Tougher hacks are represented by higher encryption, requiring a bigger investment rather than decreasing your chance of success. Instead, the random factor here comes from the level construction, which I found much more appealing. Coming up with clever maneuvers in a game such as XCOM is incredibly satisfying, yet having them fall apart because your soldier misses a simple shot is often frustrating. Invisible Ink avoids that issue, instead creating difficulty by forcing you into the unknown, often against overwhelming odds. Your agents are incredibly vulnerable, so there's no room for error and execution has to be spot on. That doesn't mean you can simply take your time, however, as security tightens every few turns. At its core, Clay has created the ultimate game of opportunity cost and risk reward. It's all about weighing up your options and getting away with as much as you can without leaving yourself in an impossible position. Raiding all the safes in a level provides valuable credits, but the time it takes may be just enough for one more guard to arrive and seal off your path to the exit. The tactical decisions are just as intriguing too. Upon encountering a room with 2 guards and a turret, you must decide whether to lure them out and deal with them individually, or find a way around to hack the turret and turn it against them. This decision making is similarly satisfying at the top level too. With only 72 hours on the clock to prepare for your final assault, prioritising missions is key. Do you opt for a rescue mission to bring in another agent, or infiltrate a cybernetics facility to upgrade the ones you already have? No decision feels clear-cut in Invisible Ink, and I loved frantically pondering over my options as the enemy core closed in. Number 7. Undertale. Undertale's real achievement for me isn't simply how much personality it has, but how every single aspect of the game works in tandem to bring that personality out. From the wonderful art and character design, to the humorous dialogue, stirring music, and even the specific gameplay of each encounter, every facet of Undertale's composition is used to bring its world and characters to life. The boss encounters are fantastic, and thus it's quite easy to dwell on them, but the care and attention to detail stretches to even the simplest enemies. From the sensitive Whimsun to the wild enthusiasm of Greater Dog, every single enemy in the game has its own little story to tell, which may be conveyed in a number of different ways. The combat system feels genuinely different from most RPGs, with your moveset not determined by your character's progression, but rather by the enemies who are present. Even when pursuing a non-violent path, there's still plenty of challenge to Undertale. Measuring up each enemy and figuring out the correct approach to appease them often takes several turns, not unlike attempting to determine an elemental weakness or an appropriate debuff in Final Fantasy. In between those steps, you must deal with avoiding the bullet hell attacks, which also play their role in conveying the enemy's nature. Undertale has so many wonderful moments which put a smile on my face, such as flexing off against Aaron the Seahorse until he gets so enthusiastic about it that he flings himself bodily from the screen, or having to get close to but not actually touch the wonderfully named Tsundere Plane. The overarching story is deep and wonderful to explore, but for me, Undertale's purest joy came from those individual moment-to-moment encounters both in and out of the battle screen, and they just keep on coming the whole way through. Number 6. Until Dawn. I'm not a huge horror fan, and I hadn't ever been properly grabbed by the David Cage style of interactive storytelling until Until Dawn came along, so I'm still completely surprised by just how deeply I fell in love with Supermassive Games' teen horror adventure. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly what makes Until Dawn work so well, but I think it might be down to perfectly nailing those moments in horror films that get people shouting at the screen. Here though, there's no need to shout. You get to decide whether Sam should run or hide from her pursuer, or whether Beth should follow the footprints through the woods or head in the sound of a noise she just heard. The control you have over how each of the characters act makes you almost into a director, and it allows for a variety of ways to play the game. Do you want to play things out as though this were a real scenario, approaching each decision in the way that you think the person under your control would act? Alternatively, you could simply always make the decision you think you yourself would opt for in that situation. In many games I find this is the path I feel compelled to go down, but by not having a distinct protagonist, Until Dawn made it much easier for me to try out different methods and act the way I felt was appropriate for the character in question, rather than simply following my own gut, which was strangely freeing to me. What would Emily be prepared to do in this situation? How would Mike respond to an animal approaching him? Would Chris actually say this to Ashley? You could even intentionally make decisions you know will lead to trouble, taking a full-on director approach and aiming to play the whole scenario out like a well-paced horror movie, complete with some inevitably tragic consequences for our poor teens. For me, Until Dawn was at its absolute finest played through with friends, where one of us played the game live on Twitch while we all discussed the action and spent far too long contemplating and arguing over the ins and outs of every possible decision. Number 5. Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain. I still haven't finished Metal Gear Solid 5, which is a shame because I know the latter parts have been very divisive. I know some who absolutely love its closing hours, while others left entirely soured on the whole experience as a result. Yet I feel comfortable putting it here on my list, because regardless of how those later sections pan out, The Phantom Pain is one of the most mechanically satisfying games I've ever laid my hands on. MGS5 is so very Metal Gear in so many ways, and yet in others it's so unlike the rest of the series. I do wish that the story had kept up the pace that the opening looked to set up, because once you get into the open world, long stretches do feel very sparse narrative-wise. Yet with so much story already told in the saga, this feels like Kojima's opportunity to prove for one final time just how well that team can innovate in the gameplay department. I'm certain that The Phantom Pain will prove to be a very influential game with regards to how designers develop open worlds and look to create emergent gameplay situations. There are so many ways to approach any given task, and it felt like whatever my brain could possibly come up with, the game would allow me to do it, and even more impressively would react appropriately to my approach. From the equipment you take into a scenario, to your direction of approach and the companion you bring along, the number of ways to tackle a base is astounding. Where so many stealth and action games feel like they direct you down a specific route, you really can go about things pretty much in any fashion you please here. That might entail crawling slowly through the centre of a base, using cover to avoid patrols and utilising D-Dog's tracking ability to watch out for potentially dangerous situations. Or perhaps you'd rather employ Quiet's ability to take aim at soldiers and snipe pairs of them in sync with you like a mysterious naked humming Captain Price. Alternatively, you could go loud from the start, rolling up on the base with a mobile missile launcher and firing off a few salvos to take out the key defences before running in guns blazing. The sheer freedom that the Phantom Pain offers to the player is enough to earn it a strong spot in my favourite games this year, and regardless of how I feel about the way the narrative goes in the latter parts of the game, I'm very much looking forward to playing a whole bunch more of it on the way there. Number 4. Splatoon. From the moment I laid eyes on Splatoon, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it, so what a delight it was when it lived up to and in many ways exceeded the expectations I had for it. When I first jumped into the beta, I had some concerns with the controls, yet after only half an hour or so I'd adapted and was diving in and out of ink and causing a whole world of trouble for the other team. Splatoon is such a wonderfully Nintendo-like take on the multiplayer shooter. It's bright and colourful, a game where the conflict is a means to an end rather than the core objective. That design makes for such a fun feel too. Other shooters have objective modes, but so often they boil down to kill the enemy players who are near the objective and then stand on it or hold a button down. In Splatoon, it might be worth your while to splat some Inklings if they're doing a great job of covering up your territory, but if you don't want to engage them, you can simply steer clear and focus on outpacing them to cover the map with your team's colour. The single player mode was a little lacking, but the boss fights did stand out, and overall I'm glad it was there because it was exactly what I needed to reach a solid level of competence before heading into the online battlefields. The final encounter with DJ Octavio was a fantastic test of my skills and reaction time, and I definitely noticed the benefits when I took those skills online after defeating him. The overall game flow in Splatoon is fantastic too. Matches are short and snappy, ensuring you're never stuck on a losing team for more than a few minutes. Matches are rarely completely one-sided either. Being ahead certainly makes things easier for you, but it only takes one slip up towards the end and it can be possible for a team to come back drastically in the dying moments. Even if you are stomped in one round, it's over quickly and then the teams are shuffled. There's a fun jumping minigame in the lobby menu too, so you don't even have to sit around doing nothing while players rotate out. I also want to speak to Splatoon's aesthetic, its wonderful blend of urban squid punk. I love the design of the Inklings, from their cutesy squid-to-kid transformations to the way character designs are simple and subtly different. The wealth of equipment options on offer is impressive too, and tracking down my favourite looking pieces of gear with those perfect stats on is a task that kept me occupied for weeks on end. I'm a kid now, I'm a squid now, I'm a kid, I'm a squid, I'm a kid, I'm a squid. Number 3, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. This seems to be the most popular pick for overall game of the year, and while it didn't quite make my number 1 slot, I absolutely see why it would for so many people. The Witcher 3 is rich, deep and diverse, offering up the chance to explore a world that is vibrant and alive and filled with wonderful characters and compelling emotional stories. There's both a real sense of scale and a real density to the world, with enough space between the villages and outposts to make things feel spacious while also never leaving you more than a few moments from another quest, enemy or point of interest. The stories you find are so consistently well written, with even the shortest and most generic ones leaving you feeling satisfied upon their conclusion. An early quest in the opening area sees you hunt down an arsonist, for example. It seems like a minor task and is solved in little time, but the way that the culprit is brought in and the sentence he's handed caught me off guard. Another early encounter sees you on the hunt for a lady's frying pan. It's a short novelty quest that raised a few chuckles from me, but then also caused me to stumble into an important clue which progressed one of my core quest lines. The beauty is that the game doesn't force you into finding that specific house or locating that clue. You could have found out that information in a completely different way. Similarly, when you need a specific herb, you could go to the nearest herbologist and offer up your witching services in exchange for a small amount. Or perhaps you might already have some that you collected from a riverbank on your travels maybe 10 or more hours ago. I did have a few minor gripes with the RPG mechanics, in particular the number of active talent slots being locked by level, as it felt a little overly restrictive when it came to mixing up your playstyle. That said, the combat itself is a glorious violence dance. I played on Blood and Broken Bones, which I found just perfectly tweaked. You can take a hit or two, but little more. I really felt in the part whether I was ducking and weaving and utilising signs to isolate individual bandits from a group and take them out, or preparing oils and bombs for an upcoming fight against some dangerous mythical foe. I was The Witcher. It certainly doesn't hurt that The Witcher has had so many years by now to build up its world, characters, monsters and their associated lore. Yet more than just about any other fantasy creation, The Witcher 3's world feels incredibly believable. Nothing seems out of place or unrealistic for the fiction, even when dealing with some of the world's more bizarre inhabitants. It also feels as though the world exists regardless of Geralt's story, rather than simply only being there for the player to interact with, which is a tough achievement to pull off. The stories of The Witcher 3 feel like they could continue to happen in interesting ways even if you weren't there, but they also feel affected by your presence. It's a very tough balance to strike, so congratulations to CD Projekt Red for making it happen. Number 2, Bloodborne. And so we reach the lofty heights of number 2, with Bloodborne coming oh so close to the top spot. It climbs so high because it goes beyond being incredible to play to being the sort of game that I just can't stop thinking about, even long after I've finished playing. Bloodborne was a surprisingly slow burn to start with. Much like From Software's other Souls titles, I enjoyed it right off the bat, but where I walked into Dark Souls 2, fresh off its predecessor and comfortable in that world, Bloodborne felt as though it had thrown me an initial curveball. Suddenly the core felt different, faster, more aggressive. It wasn't a complete overhaul, but it was enough to force me to put aside my bravado and relearn what I knew. Yet the combat is absolutely still the key to what draws me in so hard to the FromSoft style. It feels incredibly tight, physical and satisfying. Every single enemy encounter from the first injured Wolverine to the final boss fight at the conclusion feels like an event, not simply an obstacle. Even the regular enemies aren't simple fodder to be carved up for blood echoes, but a challenge to test you and help you learn and improve. It didn't take me too long to wrap my head around the new style of gameplay, one more focused on striking first and on parrying using the left-hand firearms. However, I still had plenty of learning experiences left ahead of me. Much like Souls, deaths never feel unfair or unwarranted, however. Whenever you get hit in Bloodborne, whenever you're parried, whenever you die, you know why. I knew, often before the final blow had been struck, what I'd done wrong, and inevitably I'd done something wrong. I'd messed up a parry attempt, I'd gotten greedy or lazy and hadn't retreated to heal up when I was injured. I'd run in too quickly and drawn too much attention to myself. Bloodborne does simplify a lot of things in comparison to the Souls series, from its less varied environments to its fewer character builds, with spells being much more situational and bows being a non-factor until the DLC. Yet that tighter focus allowed for a very coherent aesthetic, which I think was justified with the story that Bloodborne tells. From its initial teasings of a werewolf story, through to its unravelling into an eldritch tale, Bloodborne's teasing tidbits and carefully placed enemies slowly uncover a narrative which still has me puzzling over its many players and each of their goals to this day. I mean, after Lawrence's split with Willem over the discovery of old blood in the ancient Chalice dungeons, what made him so certain it would be a miraculous cure? How was the Great One Ebrietas left behind, and what was her role in, and motive for, encouraging the choir in its healing church to pursue this blood ministration? Who was Rom originally? Seemingly a scholar of the Bergenworth school that was granted insight, or eyes on the inside, by another Great One Kos. But why does it now reside in the lake, and what purpose does the now ancient Master Willem serve amongst the ruins of the Bergenworth College? I could go on, but it's a puzzle that many minds, including my own, are still puzzling over, and there's likely no concrete solution. Lead developer Hidetaka Miyazaki has often spoken to his love of ambiguity and speculation, and the idea that his games will hint at possible narrative threads without ever definitively marking out a clear path. Bloodborne is in some ways a little more explicit in its storytelling than FromSoft's previous RPGs, yet it certainly leaves a wealth to the imagination, right down to the possible meanings and ramifications of its multiple endings. I could go on, but I think I've spoken enough to just how much I love Bloodborne. But for all its bizarre and fascinating undertones, for all Yharnam's stunning architecture and horrendous nightmarish inhabitants, and for all the style and flair to its fashion sense and weapon design, I'll finish by saying that what ties it all together so well for me is that fundamental incredible combat at the game's core. It's so compelling to me that I will even happily plough through the relatively formulaic and storyless Chalice dungeons, because the combat puzzle of navigating an area or tackling a tough boss is just so satisfying. Number 1, Rocket League. And so we come to this. I'm not actually sure how best to talk about Rocket League, yet when I came to put this list together, I slowly realised that it had to be in that top spot. To put it simply, there were times when I'd played enough Bloodborne for the day, or didn't feel like playing it at all. I haven't ever been asked to play Rocket League and not wanted to, and I've been asked a lot. After my first 2 games of Rocket League, I was saying, you know, this could be my game of the year, it's that good. I was semi-serious, but I still expected that initial hype to fall off eventually, and yet it never did. Those first moments with Rocket League are phenomenal. The first time you drive into the ball and bump it forward, it feels great. The first time you flip the ball across the line and it just explodes, it feels incredible. Your first demolition, that first epic save, the first time you manage to boost erratically into the sky and clip an aerial in roughly the right direction, it all feels so good. A real part of Rocket League's appeal is just how simple it is to pick up. It takes less than 5 minutes to get a good handle on driving the car around, jumping and flipping, collecting and using boost. And then you're in. You're on the orange team. Go put the ball in the blue team's goal and don't let it go in ours. That's it. In many ways it's the spiritual successor to FIFA Street 2 that I've always secretly wanted. Small team, cage match football, where anything goes and the only rule is to score more goals in 5 minutes than the other side. That'd probably be enough by itself to keep me entertained for quite some time, yet much like street football, the long-term appeal of Rocket League comes from the impossibly high skill ceiling. After hours of all driving at the ball like the RC equivalent of a schoolyard kickabout, you start to play around with other ideas. What if I drive up the wall to pop the ball in rather than waiting for it? What if I jump off the ground and boost over the other players' cars to shoot as they wait for the ball to drop? Getting from that initial theory to any kind of consistent result is a steep climb, but even the simplest adjustments to your play puts you a step up from the basics, and then you begin to see players doing even more, rocketing high into the sky to bring down incredible dunks into the goal mouth, or diving perfectly across their box to make a last-minute save. It may be easy to pick up, but trying to master Rocket League is a lifetime's endeavour. As if the core gameplay loop wasn't satisfying enough, the whole package looks and sounds fantastic too. The customization options unlock thick and fast, offering you a wealth of different ways to outfit your vehicle to your liking. Everything stands out in game too, making it all the better when you see your hot pink truck spewing out dollar bills from the back as you crash the ball home. Oh, did I mention that the ball explodes when you score, and that a goal horn blows as every car in the vicinity is sent careening away by the force of it? Having the game launched for free on PlayStation Plus was a smart move too, because it ensured an incredibly strong online audience right from the get-go, something which could have immediately stalled the game's appeal if there was no one to play with. The developer Psyonix have been incredible with their post-release support as well, being very communicative with players and responding to any questions or concerns. They've also used the game's success to ensure regular bumps of DLC, which has offered a handful of new cosmetic items for a sensible price, but also provided any new maps to all players for free. Again, a smart decision to keep the user base all in one place. There have been other tweaks too, such as the offering of mutators for more wacky matchups, a snow day variant more closely resembling ice hockey, and upcoming plans to start testing out more unusual map designs along with the help of the player base in a new Rockets Labs feature. Each of these offers a fun diversion, but also emphasises just how well tuned that core game mode is. Rockets League is one of those games that might be eligible to be described as perfect. I can't think of anything that could be changed to improve it at its core. There's plenty that could be added as bonuses, but the central game is so wonderfully on the money, and it shows. It's rare to see a game with such a wide positive reception, but Rocket League absolutely stole the show from day one. I said earlier in these awards that I don't think I've ever played a game of Rocket League and not enjoyed myself, and I think that's true. Win or lose, it's always a joy. There's moments of ecstatic triumph and moments of devastating failure in every single match, and yet there's just enough time to bask in them before the action is back on again. I simply don't want to stop playing Rocket League, and I don't intend to anytime soon. It's sheer unadulterated fun, and that's why Rocket League is my 2015 Game of the Year. And that's all the awards for today. Well, that really does wrap things up. It's been a fun ride, and I hope you've had a good time listening to me waffle over the course of these 5 videos about my favourite games from last year. If you want to see what I'm looking forward to in 2016, be sure to check out my 16 games for 2016 feature. Perhaps one of them will drag me away from Rocket League for long enough to snatch next year's elusive title. Thank you for joining me. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to bop that like button and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more from me. I've been Ken, thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers!